Welcome to our deep dive today into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, classic.
It is. It really is. We're going to unpack some pretty powerful insights, I think, into the human condition, especially like during hardship.
Right.
And we'll be drawing excerpts from the book itself.
Of course.
Including the preface by Gordon W. Allport.
Yeah.
Really helped bring Frankl to a wider audience. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. It's remarkable to think about. Frankl's work isn't just theoretical.
Yeah.
It's deeply rooted in his own experiences as a psychiatrist during the horrors of Nazi concentration camps.
Right.
And this gave him a really unique perspective.
Yeah.
To observe, both his own responses and those of his fellow prisoners to unimaginable suffering.
When I first picked up this book, I was struck by how Frankl contrasts his approach, which he calls logotherapy, with the ideas of Freud. It's really a different way of thinking about what drives us as humans. Instead of, focusing on pleasure or avoiding pain like Freud, Frankl puts this will to meaning at the very center of human existence.
And what's fascinating here is Frankl isn't just proposing like an alternative theory.
Right.
He's drawing on his observations of people in the most extreme circumstances imaginable.
Yeah.
Like imagine yourself arriving at Auschwitz, stripped of your possessions, your identity, even your name.
It's hard to even imagine.
Frankl describes these selections upon arrival.
Right.
That chilling finger game that determined who lived and who died within hours.
Wow.
It's a scene of absolute dehumanization.
He paints this picture of the smoke from the crematoria becoming like a normal part of the landscape, almost an accepted reality.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how anyone could hold on to any sense of self or hope in such a horrific environment.
Right. He was in this abyss of despair that Frankl observed this remarkable pattern in how his fellow prisoners coped. And he describes these distinct psychological phases that they went through.
Yeah.
First, there's this initial shock where death almost becomes an abstraction. Then a kind of emotional death sets in, with apathy serving as a coping mechanism.
It's like the mind just shuts down to protect itself from the overwhelming pain and terror.
But it's that third phase that's most crucial to understanding Frankl's ideas.
Okay.
This struggle to find meaning.
Yeah.
Even amidst such utter despair.
Wow.
This is where the seeds of logotherapy were sown.
He gives these vivid examples to illustrate the struggle. There's a story of the prisoner who told Frankl to throw away his manuscript.
Oh, wow.
His life's work.
Yeah.
And the prisoner's response.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful.
It's a gut-wrenching moment where Frankl confronts the brutal reality of the camps.
Yeah.
Like the complete annihilation of his former life.
And yet, even in those dehumanizing conditions, there were these glimmers of connection to the past, to a sense of shared humanity.
Yeah.
Frankl describes encountering a fellow Viennese prisoner on the train, passing his old neighborhood. And for a fleeting moment, they were transported back to their former lives.
It's almost as if the small connections became anchors of hope in the sea of despair. So it makes you question how anyone could endure such suffering and still believe in something bigger than themselves, something worth living for.
Right.
But then he goes on to describe the Muslim prisoners.
It's important to clarify what that term meant in the context of the camps.
Okay.
Muslim wasn't used in a religious sense, but rather as a label for prisoners. Who had reached a state of utter despair and physical deterioration. They were often seen as close to death, having given up on any hope of survival, let alone, finding meaning.
It's hard to even fathom that level of despair, that complete loss of hope.
Yeah.
It really underscores the power of what Frankl is talking about, this will to meaning as a driving force. Even in the most dire circumstances.
And that's where Frank's concept of logotherapy comes in.
Okay.
He's suggesting that this will to meaning is more fundamental to human nature than even the drive for pleasure or the avoidance of pain, as Freud believed.
Okay, let's unpack this because this is pretty mind-blowing. So you're saying that even in a concentration camp, where basic survival was the paramount concern, people were still driven by this need for meaning.
Absolutely. Frankl observed it firsthand.
Yeah.
He saw that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, those who could find a reason to live, a purpose to cling to, were more likely to persevere.
So it's not just about enduring the pain, but about finding something that transcends it.
Yes.
Something that gives that pain a purpose.
Exactly.
That must have been incredibly difficult in a place like Auschwitz.
Of course.
What did that even look like?
Well, Frankl describes finding meaning in a variety of ways, even in the smallest of things. He talks about the power of humor, the importance of cherishing small pleasures, like a decent cook in the camp.
Right.
And the ability to escape mentally through memories and imagination.
It's remarkable that even in such a dehumanizing environment, these flickers of humanity, this search for meaning could still exist.
Absolutely.
I'm curious to understand more about how this played out in the lives of Frankl and his fellow prisoners.
That's exactly what we'll explore. As we dive deeper into man's search for meaning, we'll look at specific examples of how Frankl and others found meaning in the camps and how those experiences shaped his understanding of logotherapy.
All right, let's do it. It's amazing to think about finding meaning in a place like Auschwitz.
Yeah.
What kinds of things did Frankl and his fellow prisoners focus on?
Well, for Frankl, one of the most powerful sources of meaning was his work. He'd been working on a manuscript before being sent to the camps.
Right.
And he was determined to finish it.
Wow.
Even if it meant, writing on scraps of paper.
Right.
Hiding them from the guards.
Yeah.
And for him, this work represented like a connection to his past. To his identity as a psychiatrist. And a scholar.
Right.
And it gave him this sense of purpose that transcended the horrors of his present reality.
It's like that manuscript became a symbol of hope.
Yeah.
A reminder that there was a world outside the barbed wire.
Exactly.
A world that he'd still contribute to.
And he wasn't alone in finding meaning in work.
He describes how some prisoners found purpose in their assigned tasks.
Oh, wow.
Even the most menial ones.
Right.
And they saw these tasks as a way to maintain a sense of order and dignity in this chaotic and dehumanizing environment.
It's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? Finding meaning in work that's forced upon you.
Right.
Work that's part of a system designed to break you down.
Right. It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
This ability to find purpose, even in the most unlikely places.
And it's not just about work. Frankl also talks about finding meaning in relationships, even the brief and fleeting ones that were possible in the camps.
Right.
He describes the importance of small acts of kindness, sharing a piece of bread, or a kind word with a fellow prisoner.
It's like those moments of human connection became beacons of light in the darkness.
Yeah.
These reminders that they weren't alone in their suffering.
Did he talk about any other sources of meaning?
Yeah, he talks about the importance of nature. Finding solace in the beauty of a sunset or the sound of birdsong, even in a place as desolate as Auschwitz. These small glimpses of nature could provide a sense of peace and transcendence. He also talks about the power of mental escape, using his imagination to transport himself to different places and times. He would give lectures in his mind, compose symphonies, even imagine reuniting with his wife.
It's fascinating how the human mind can create these spaces of refuge, even in the most horrific of circumstances. But it makes you wonder, how do these experiences relate to his concept of logotherapy? How can we apply these insights to our own lives outside of the extreme context of a concentration camp?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
And one that Frankl addresses directly in his book. He argues that the lessons learned in the camps are applicable to all of us, regardless of our circumstances. He believes that everyone faces suffering in some form or another. And that the key to navigating that suffering lies in finding meaning within it.
So it's not about avoiding suffering, but about facing it with purpose, with a sense of meaning that transcends the immediate pain.
Exactly. And that's where logotherapy comes in. Logotherapy is based on the premise that the primary drive in humans is not pleasure, as fully believed. But this will to meaning, Frankl argues that we are constantly striving to find meaning in our lives. And that this striving is what gives us purpose and direction.
So how do we cultivate that? How do we cultivate that will to meaning? How do we find that purpose and direction, especially in a world that can often feel chaotic and meaningless?
Well, Frankl outlines 3 main avenues for discovering meaning. The first is creating work or doing a deed. This could involve pursuing a career.
that aligns with your values.
Right.
Engaging in creative endeavors, or simply performing acts of service for others.
Okay, what's the second?
The second is experiencing something or encountering someone.
Okay.
This emphasizes the importance of cultivating deep relationships, appreciating beauty in all its forms, and being open to new experiences.
That a third?
The third avenue is the attitude we take towards unavoidable suffering. This is perhaps the most challenging avenue, but also the most profound. Frankl argues that even in the face of suffering, that cannot be changed. We can choose to find meaning in it, to grow from it, and to use it as an opportunity, to connect with something larger than ourselves.
This idea of finding meaning in suffering is particularly intriguing. Can you elaborate on that? How can we possibly find meaning in something that causes us pain?
Well, think back to the examples we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Frankl finding solace in his work.
Right.
Prisoners finding purpose in their tasks. Those small acts of kindness shared between those who were suffering.
Right.
In each of these instances, meaning wasn't found in the suffering itself, but in the response to it.
Okay.
And the choice to act, to connect, to transcend the immediate circumstances.
Okay.
Frankl believed that this ability to choose our attitude, even in the face of suffering, is what makes us truly human.
It's almost like he's saying that suffering can be a catalyst for growth.
Right.
Like a crucible in which we forge a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Precisely. And he's careful to point out that he's not advocating for seeking out suffering or glorifying it in any way. He acknowledges that suffering is inherently painful and should be avoided whenever possible.
Of course.
But when it is unavoidable, as it inevitably is for all of us at some point in our lives, he believes that we have the power to choose how we respond to it.
Okay.
And that this choice can be a source of profound meaning and growth.
This is really challenging. Some of my assumptions about suffering, I've always thought of it as something to be avoided, something to be feared. But Frankl seems to be suggesting that it can be a source of strength, even of joy, if we approach it with the right mindset.
And that's a radical idea, isn't it?
It is.
To embrace suffering, not as something desirable, but as an inherent part of the human experience that has the potential to teach us, to transform us, to connect us to something larger than ourselves.
It's a lot to take in.
I know.
This idea of meaning being something we actively create. Rather than something that's simply given to us is really powerful.
It is.
I can see this would be incredibly relevant to our listeners, especially those who are struggling with their own challenges.
And it's important to remember that finding meaning is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. It's something we cultivate through our choices, our actions, and our attitudes, day in and day out.
So it's not about finding some grand overarching purpose, but about finding meaning in the small moments, in the everyday experiences that make up our lives.
Exactly.
I'm curious, though, how did Frankl deal with the transition back to life outside the camps after experiencing such extreme suffering? How do you even begin to process that and find meaning in a world that suddenly seems so different?
That's a question we'll explore. In the final part of our deep dive, Frankl's insights into what he calls depersonalization after liberation are just as relevant today as they were then, particularly in a world that is increasingly filled with trauma and uncertainty.
It's hard to imagine what it must have been like for Frankl and others, to re-enter the world after experiencing the horrors of the camps.
Yeah, he uses this term depersonalization to describe the feeling of detachment and unreality that many survivors experienced. It's like the world outside the camps felt, foreign and dreamlike, almost too good to be true. And while there was this immense relief at being free, there was also this sense of profound loss and disorientation.
That makes sense. After enduring such prolonged trauma, must have been incredibly difficult to simply switch back to a normal way of life. What did he say about how people coped with those feelings?
Well, Frankl observed that some survivors struggled with bitterness and this desire for revenge.
It's understandable, right?
Of course.
To have experienced such. cruelty and injustice, to have lost so much. It's natural to feel anger and resentment.
Absolutely.
But he also cautioned against succumbing to those negative emotions, didn't he?
Yes. He saw bitterness as a trap, a way of remaining stuck in the past, unable to fully embrace the possibilities of the present.
Right.
He believed that true healing and growth required finding a way to move forward, to find meaning and purpose in the aftermath of such profound suffering.
Did he offer any guidance on how to do that? It seems like an almost superhuman feat to overcome that level of trauma and find meaning in the world again.
Well, one of the key insights he emphasizes is the importance of responsibility.
Okay.
He argues that even though we can't always choose our circumstances, we always have the power to choose our attitude, our response to those circumstances.
But that's about taking ownership of our own lives.
Yes.
Even when those lives have been turned upside down by forces beyond our control.
Exactly. And that sense of ownership, that agency, is crucial to finding meaning. Frankl also talked about the importance of love.
Okay.
Connecting with others in a meaningful way.
Right.
He believed that love is the ultimate expression of the will to meaning.
Wow.
A way of transcending our own limitations and connecting with something larger than ourselves.
That's really powerful. It's like he's saying that even in the face of immense suffering, love can be a source of healing and hope.
Yes.
What about those who don't have religious faith?
Right.
Where did Frankl believe they could find that ultimate meaning?
It's important to note that while Frankl was a man of deep faith, he didn't believe that. Finding meaning was limited to those who share his beliefs. He argued that. The search for meaning is a universal human experience, and that there are many paths to finding it.
So it's not about adhering to a specific dogma or belief system, but about actively seeking out meaning in our lives, regardless of our religious or philosophical background.
Precisely.
Frankl believed that meaning can be found in work, in relationships, in nature, in art, in acts of service, and even in the way we face suffering.
Wow.
He argued that it's not something that's simply handed to us, but something we cultivate through our choices and actions.
It's like he's challenging us to become active participants in our own lives, to take responsibility for creating meaning, rather than passively waiting for it to find us.
Exactly. And he leaves us with this incredibly powerful thought. After surviving the horrors at the camps, the only thing he feared was God.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
If you were to give a lecture on your own life experiences, what would the title be? What would you want others to learn?
That's something for each of us to ponder.
Yeah.
Frankl's work ultimately reminds us that even in the darkest of times, we have the power to choose. We need to choose hope, to choose love.
Right.
And making those choices, we not only transform our own lives, but also contribute to the more meaningful and compassionate world.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking deep dive.
It has.
Frankl's man's search for meaning is a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring importance of finding meaning, even in the face of suffering.
Absolutely.
Until next time.